Now from our bureau in Washington, D.C., President of Americans for Limited Government, Richard Manning. Richard, all this kind of reminds me of what happened months ago with Obamacare and the so-called repeal and replace. The fix was almost as bad, maybe worse than the problem itself. The problem is the Republicans got all balled up here in granting amnesty while trying to secure the border and fix legal immigration. A huge, huge mistake. And in my opinion, it's almost better that the legislation failed in this case.
Well, the legislation did fail. The legislation that was actually the original compromise by House Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Goodlatte was a compromise that people who were very strong for strong immigration laws supported, because it did provide at least some way for people who were DACA recipients to get a pathway to get a job. But it failed because the fact is the left doesn't want immigration to be solved. They want to have our borders open. They want to have a constant flow of people, of picture victims who aren't really victims in many cases. They want to create a crisis, and then they want to make it so the crisis can't be solved because they think the crisis benefits them. And the truth is, it does benefit them, because when you have open borders, they calculate that those people who come across are going to become future Democratic voters.
Yes.
And that's to their that's to their benefit.
All right, that's only half the equation here, though, Richard. The other half is 41 Republicans voted against the Goodlatte measure, and I don't believe the other one may not even come up for a vote now at this point. We'll see next week. And the reason for that is because they linked amnesty to border protection and cleaning up the messy legal immigration process. But I think in the big picture here, what we're seeing is a lack of Republican leadership. You have an open borders buffoon leading the House of Representatives, and he is an open borders guy. He claims to be a conservative, but he's not. And then in the United States Senate, you have one of the most selfish leaders. Sure, he's the longest surviving Republican leader in United States Senate history, but that doesn't mean anything. That probably just proves exactly my point, and that he's selfish. And I think what's happening here is clearly the President of the United States is driving the agenda almost on a daily, almost on an hourly basis, and the Republican leadership simply cannot keep pace.
I think that's right, and I'm not going to disagree at all with your characterization. There is a lack of leadership in the House, but the one thing we need to remember is the Republican Party is divided on immigration. President Trump really changed things on immigration by driving that issue and making it a primary issue from his voters. But a lot of the people who got elected on the Republican side were still operating and still are operating under almost a sense of, well, Trump's an anomaly, that it doesn't really matter what he says because he's not one of us. He hasn't come up through K Street. He hasn't come up through the system. Right. And he doesn't do the fundraising piece off of K Street and through the big business community that wants immigration, wants open borders. And so it's a different environment. So really what we have to have is we have to have an attitude adjustment amongst those Republicans that forces them to become Trump supporters on immigration, support securing the borders first and foremost, support making certain that only people who are legally here are able to get jobs, right, and really put pressure on the pressure points so then we can deal with some of the other problems that exist. But until we secure the border, until we end these caravans of people coming here and claiming asylum or sending children across the border in a hope to set up an anchor family, till we end those things, we are really not going to be able to solve any of the other problems.
And I think the President of the United States is the de facto leader of the United States House of Representatives and really, in a sense, in the United States Senate as well, although Mitch McConnell would never admit that. But clearly, at the very least, immigration reform, if you want to call it that, is on some kind of life support in the House of Representatives right now. Again, we don't know if the other bill is going to be brought up. I don't think it will be. Here's the president on this. Republicans should stop wasting their time on immigration until after we elect more senators and congressmen, women in November. Dems are just playing games, have no intention of doing anything to solve this decades-old problem. We can pass great legislation after the red wave. Point one, I think he's saying without saying that Mitch McConnell is the problem. and Mitch McConnell could change the rules of the United States Senate, and we could get legislation passed through. That's number one. But number two, I see a problem in the president's tweet, and that is, what if there isn't a red wave? And I keep making this point on this program over and over and over again. This might be the opportunity of a lifetime right now with control of the House and the Senate and a Republican president. We don't know what's going to happen in November.
Well, you're 100% correct. Anytime you're waiting for an election to solve the problem, you're reshuffling the deck, and you don't know if you're going to get good cards or bad cards. So that's exactly right. The challenge that the president is recognizing, and I think he's very realistic. I think it's a brilliant tweet, in that he's recognizing that right now the cards they have, everybody thought that it was a good hand, but it's not a good hand. You've got a guy like Jeff Flake who decides that out of the blue that he's not going to vote for a Republican nominee for a circuit court judge because he's going through some things. One vote, one person doing that on the Republican side for whatever reason causes the inability to take action, the inability to get somebody confirmed, the inability to pass a piece of legislation. So the challenge is, and I'm not going to argue that McConnell isn't responsible for this, because many of these people are people he supported in primaries to be in the Senate, which is why he's the longest lasting leader.
Yeah.
But there's a real numbers problem when one member of the Senate can effectively put thumbs up or thumbs down on legislation. And the legislation that President Trump can get in that kind of Senate is not the kind of legislation that he promised the American people that he would deliver. So he's asking for us to give him help, to give him the team on the ground so he can get his job done.
Mitch McConnell has no problem sitting on Ted Cruz or on Mike Lee when they go conservative on him. He can certainly sit on the rhinos in the Senate and force them to stick with the pack and get legislation through. I firmly believe that if he wanted to do it, he could do it. But let's look at the entire week here. One thing bothers me. I'm not going to criticize the president for this, but it bothers me that he signed this executive order to so-called help the illegal children. I think he was doing the right thing to begin with, and I think the Republicans in Congress put a lot of pressure on him to do something, and so he came up with something. But in the end, we know, Richard, this isn't going to satisfy the mainstream media. It's not going to satisfy the fascist left. It's not going to satisfy Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. They're still going to go after the president. They're still going to go after Republican members of Congress. So here's the question. How damaging do you think, in electoral sense, this last week was for people who are running for re-election, Republicans running for re-election in November?
I don't think it was damaging at all. I don't think it was damaging at all for a simple reason. The revelations that a vast majority of these claims are fraudulent. The Time magazine cover that's coming out with President Trump looking down meanly at a person at a 2-year-old who's crying, but it turns out she's crying because her mom's being searched, not because she's separated from her.
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
It's Photoshop.
But you don't think it hurts? You don't think this week is going to hurt, huh?
Yes. I don't think it's going to hurt at all, because here's what happened. President Trump is highlighting the victims of this massive surge, the victims of MS-13, the victims of everything. And what's been highlighted this week is the atrocities that they've pointed out all occurred under Obama. Yep. And none of the left cared about it then. Yep. So when you get down to it and you find in a political environment, the short term, if you're doing a short-term poll and we were one day away from the election, it would matter. But facts win. And in this instance, the facts are against them, and the American people want strong borders. They want a wall. They want people to E-verify. They want to end chain migration. And the fact that there is a Democrat in the Senate who would support that is a fact that the American people will not be lost to the American people. And with 10 senators up on the Democrat side who are from Trump-winning states, there is an opportunity to put some new voices into that Senate and move the ball next year.
A lot can happen between now and November, but I think the bottom line is the president needs to continue to be the leader on Capitol Hill, and I mean on Capitol Hill, and he needs to continue to drive the agenda. He's not driven by ideology. President Trump is driven by instinct, and on immigration in particular, his instincts are pretty much on target, 95% on target. So continue to lead away, Mr. President. Richard, thank you. Coming up next, how the liberal left set up the president.